Welcome to Breaking Par with Bernard Sheridan, the golf podcast that interviews the best and brightest minds in the golf industry. Now, here's your host, Bernard Sheridan.
Ed, welcome to Breaking Par. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Well, thanks, Bernard. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. So I'm glad that you're here. So I'm looking forward to our conversation. So the first question we always ask all of our guests is, when is the very first time you picked up a golf club?
When I was growing up, my dad was dean of students and the golf coach at a community college in North Platte, Nebraska. And so he got me a set of clubs real early. I was probably 7 or 8. And at that time, he was just helping me a little bit. And I was banging wiffle balls around the yard. And then sometime about the age of 9, we went out to the golf course for the first time. And I can remember the very first time that I played golf was with my dad and one of his college players. So I was a little bit nervous, but it was fun. And I was hooked right away.
Nice. So when did you decide that you might want to maybe do this as a profession?
So, I played golf in high school, and, my intent at that time was, my plan was to go to the University of Nebraska and study architecture. And the summer before my junior and senior in high school, I got a phone call from Richard Skinner. He was the head pro at North Platte Country Club, where we were members and where I grew up. And he asked me to come to work for him. And so, it was a small operation. The pro shop and the range balls in the bag room were all real close together, and the golf carts were around the corner. And so I would open and he would close, or he would open and I would close. But I really liked what he did for a living. And I thought, wow, what a great way to spend the rest of my life. And so that one phone call changed my life. And so I went to work for him that summer. And so from that point on, I really thought that I wanted to be a golf professional.
Nice. So, and are you pleased that you went that way? Are you still pleased that you went that way?
Oh, absolutely. I can't imagine doing anything else.
Yeah, it's a great job. I mean, because it's really not a job. It is sometimes, but a lot of times, because we love it so much, it doesn't feel quite as much like a job.
You're right. I still, to this day, when I wake up in the morning, I'm looking forward to going to work.
Yeah, that's some good stuff. So is the bulk of what you do instruction, or is it pretty much working at working in the pro shop and or at the club, or doing pretty much everything?
Well, I've been a head pro for the last 27 years, but I'm now transitioning into a role of director of instruction at the club. But instruction has always had kind of a major role in what I did. I, of course, always seemed to have a lot of balls in the air with, all the activities at the club. But I'd look at the schedule and figure out when I could teach. And, if we had a 1 o'clock shotgun, get the tournament going, then I'd give a lesson at 2 and 3 and 4, and then come in and score the event. So it was especially the last 5 years, it's just been insane with all the club activities and my teaching. And so now the club made me a very nice offer to be a director of instruction, and I'm really excited about the opportunity.
Nice. So for some of our listeners, tell us what the differences are between the two positions, between head professional and director of instruction.
Well, with the head professional, I still taught a lot, but also, had the administration and the duties of running the business. So really that's probably the big difference, is just having more responsibilities. When I got into the golf business, Richard Skinner was my influence. He was a good teacher, and I really liked that aspect. I remember one of my job interviews telling the head pro that I wanted to be a teaching professional, and so that's really been my number one focus since I got in the golf business.
Yeah, I know that for me, when I got into it, I immediately, that's what I gravitated towards. I had no desire to be a club pro, at all. I had no desire to be a tour professional. I had no desire to be, a playing professional or any of those things. All I wanted to do was help people enjoy the game more. And it's probably because I originally came from a teaching background. I taught music for years, and I was a musician, and then I kind of transferred into audio, and then I transferred into golf. And it just seemed like it was a good fit for me at the time, and it's worked out pretty well. But I never really had the desire to do anything but instruct and help people just have more fun at the game and just enjoy it more.
I'll bet you find a lot of similarities between teaching music and teaching golf.
Tremendous amount of similarities. And it's funny too that I'll use metaphors as opposed to music with golf, especially when it comes to lessons. There's so many players that I find who say, "Hey, I want to take a lesson," or a lesson, or I want to take a couple lessons or a series of lessons, and then they take that series of lessons and they achieve what they're trying to achieve at that moment, and then they go. So if you look at music, there's not too many people who go to take a music lesson and take one lesson, or take maybe 4 or 5 weeks of lessons, and then don't take lessons anymore. Because they wouldn't be very good musicians if they did that. And I think that golf is very, very similar in that. And I think that the excuse that a lot of players use, or I want to say clients use, is that, I don't want to be a pro. I don't need to be a scratch golfer. I just want to have fun and go out there and I just want to be a lot more consistent ball striker. Well, if you're a lot more consistent ball striker, then you're going to be a lot better player. But you can't become a consistent ball striker unless you consistently work with someone who has a watchful eye, who can see what are those things that you're kind of not doing correctly, and what are the things that you are doing correctly. And they always end up kind of, if they do those few lessons, then they kind of, you don't see them, and then they stray off of what they learned, and kind of revert back and then listen to information. Do you find that with your students, some of your students, or many of them?
Oh, absolutely. The feedback is the key to learning. So the programs that seem to work the best, one private lesson a month, and then 4 supervised practices. And I've kind of built my programs around frequent feedback, because I think the more that they can be in front of me, the more that they can stay on the path to better golf. And so I think that that's good. I also, I'm a big believer in, one of the questions that I ask golfers a lot of times, if someone were to pay us $1 million each to make you 5 shots better, what would we work on? And sometimes that opens their eyes a little bit, and it makes them think a little bit, because the student knows that it's not all about the swing if I put it in those terms. And so then they start thinking, well, maybe we could work a little bit on the short game. And then, I always try to put in a little bit of performance factor in every lesson, whether it's the mental game or just talking about how to practice. So I think all those things are good. I love the analogy that you used about music lessons, because people don't think that way in golf. Sometimes they think, well, I'm just going to go take one lesson, and then they go out and try it. Well, that didn't work, so I'm not going to take another lesson. And I think if more people had that mindset of like taking piano lessons or guitar lessons, where you're seeing the teacher once a week, I think that the more people would get better at the game, and more people would take lessons.
I totally agree. And too, when you think about it, if you look at, for those of our listeners who are musicians, or have taken an instrument in grammar school or junior high or whatever, I'm sure that when you came home every day your mom would say or your dad would say, did you, what do you have for homework? What's your homework today? And don't forget to practice your lessons. Get on that piano and practice for a half hour, and do it every day. And because I'm paying a lot for those lessons, and I want you to learn this. So, but people, most people who take golf lessons are not, I don't want to say they're not kids, because there's a ton of kids who take lessons. But a lot of times when they're adults and we give them drills and things to do and to work on and to practice, a lot of them aren't doing it every single day. Some of them will come back and I'll say, so did you work on your drills today? Well, this came up and that came up. I really didn't have time to do it. You think maybe we could reschedule for next week? Like sometimes people will call me and say that. Most of the time people won't call me. They'll just show up. And then we're basically doing the same lesson all over again that we did the week before, because they didn't work on any of those things. So do you run into that with some of your students?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. All the time. So, I try to, I've got a little practice card that I'll give them, and it'll have some short game stuff on it, and I'll give it to them, and it's got 7 little boxes, and they're all game type. Like, for example, put 10 balls in a circle around the hole from 3 feet. And, your goal is to make 8 out of 10 or better. But write down how you actually did. And my hope is that by the time I see them next time that they filled out all 7 boxes. So, yeah, I encourage them to get out and work on, not just on full swing, but on every part of their game.
What are some of the other things in those boxes? Tell us about those boxes, because I'm sure our listeners are interested and would maybe like to use that in what they do.
So I mentioned the putting. Then I'll encourage them to putt 9 holes. And depending on their skill level, I might say every hole needs to be at least 15 feet long. Okay. And so go out and putt 9 holes and keep score. And then I'll give them a target score. So, if they're more of a novice type player, I might say, okay, every hole has to be 15 feet long, and your target score is to get 21 or better. And then the better that they get, then I start to increase the challenge. I might say, okay, now every hole needs to be at least 20 feet long. Try to have some uphill and some downhill and some side hill. And, so as they get better, I increase the challenge. I have the putting game, a chipping game, where I'll have them chip and then go putt it out, play 9 holes. And then at first, I'll encourage them to just play 9 holes, give themselves a pretty good lie for each one. And then as they improve, then I want them to do maybe 5 easy holes and then 4 medium holes. And then eventually I'd like them to play 3 easy holes, 3 medium holes, and 3 difficult holes. A difficult hole might be a challenging lie or out of the rough or both. But what I want to do is I want to always be increasing their skill level as they practice and move forward. And so then the final piece of that practice card has to do with wedges. And on our practice facility, we have some wedge targets. And so I'll have them hit to the wedge targets. And then I will define what is a successful attempt. And so I will tell them, I want you to hit a shot to this target, and then I want you to change to another target. Because I always want them changing targets. Because what they have to do, and I learned this from a book called Make It Stick, where I want them going through the whole problem-solving process. Because every shot that we hit on the golf course really is solving a problem. You're going to have, you can make an argument that every shot that you hit on the golf course is different from any shot that you've had before. And so by solving the problem, you have to determine the distance and the lie and the wind conditions, and then take that all into account, go through your pre-shot routine, hit the shot, watch the ball for feedback. So depending on the student in front of me, I'm going to define that area as, I might say, okay, within 5 yards of the wedge target is a successful attempt. And then they move on to the next one. And so I will define the successful area I will define the number of attempts that they go through. So we have 4 wedge targets, and I might say, okay, so within 5 yards is successful, and I want you to go through that and hit to those 4 wedge targets 3 times. So that's kind of how I define that for the players.
Which is great, because what they're doing is they're actually emulating play in a practice format, so they don't have to walk the course. But they're, with the putting, they're emulating what they would be doing on the green. With the chipping, they're emulating if they miss a shot, if they miss a green, what are they doing to get the ball up and into the hole? How many times is it taking them to do it? It's starting to make them figure out different ways to get the ball in the hole, and to look at maybe use different clubs, things of that nature. Depending upon the lie, the situation, where they have to carry a bunker or not, or things like that. And then the wedge thing too. It's fine tuning their approach shot, so they can get. And if they're within 5 yards, then that relates right back to where you're starting them in putting, from that 15 feet or 25 feet or however far they are. So that's some great information for our listeners, because if they kind of do these things, what they're doing then is they're not just going to a range and hitting a 7-iron 20 times and then hitting driver and hitting this and not. So they're doing things that are more what they would actually encounter when they're playing. And I think a lot of people don't do that when they go to the range. They just kind of grab their bag, and most people we see, they'll hit some wedge shots, and then they'll hit a boatload of 7-irons, and then they'll hit a boatload of drives, and then they leave.
Absolutely.
Which is not really ingraining anything that they're going to really deal with on the golf course. As you mentioned too, almost every single shot that they hit on the golf course, they've never hit before. So the only shot that I think that they've ever hit, if they're playing a round of golf, and they're playing at the same club, is their tee shot, because that's pretty consistently the same all the time, unless conditions are different. If it's wet one day, or if it's really dry, or if it's windy, or if it's raining, or if the temperature is lower, or whatever. But other than that, it's very rare that people hit balls into the exact same spot, even though a lot of my students will say, oh, I beg to differ. I hit it in the woods on this hole every single time, and I'm always in the same spot. And I'm so tired of it. I wish I could just hit it in the same spot, in the right spot, instead of the wrong spot. But that's some great insight for our listeners to understand. And now, when you mentioned that they have supervised practice 3 times a week?
Well, what I'll be doing for this season is I will, for the first time, have an online lesson scheduler. And as part of the programming, most of the packages will include supervised practices. And so they'll be able to go on my website and just schedule which supervised practice that they want to attend. And like I said, I think that's probably the best case scenario of doing 1 lesson a month and 4 supervised practices. Okay. That really seems to make a difference in players' games. I also try to, I want them to know how to practice. We talked about the short game. What I encourage for full swing on the range is I encourage them, kind of depending on how close they are to competition, but I want them doing a segment of block practice where it might be the 7-iron over and over and over again. But when they're in block practice, I want them making a lot of practice swings, paying attention to what they are doing, what they're working on. I want them swinging slow and not really worried so much about, I want the focus to be on how they did with the motion and not necessarily on the results of the shot. Then I want them to work on some random practice where they're going to do something different every time. So they're going to go through a full routine, just like they would on the golf course, and they're going to change something, whether it's a target, a club, a trajectory, a shape. I want them to change something every time to make it more like they would be on the golf course. And then at the end, I want them to play a game. So I'm going to ask them to challenge themselves. And it might be simply hitting a 7-iron to a target green and hitting 3 in a row. And it's going to go back to the same thing where, I want for the novice player, I want that person to, I want the test or the game to be appropriate for their ability. I don't want to make it too easy, but I also don't want to make it too challenging. So, they're going to hit a target green 3 times in a row before they can leave the practice facility. Or it might be a driver between that pole and that tree, and they have to hit 4 out of 5 within that fairway before they can leave the practice facility. And kind of the same way with the putting and chipping. I want them to play a game. And the reason why I like that, Bernard, is that they're going to play, or they're going to practice under just a little bit of pressure. And what I think that does is that helps them to play better under real pressure when they go to the golf course, and especially in competition.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, and I like that premise. I know that Ben Hogan used to, for himself, have the last 3 balls had to be within a certain spot, and if they weren't, then he had to go hit another 21 balls. And he wasn't going to leave until he did that. He would also take breaks in between those 21 balls. So do you encourage your students to take breaks in between shots, like Ben Hogan did, to kind of ease the, I want to say to get them in more of a golf playing mode than just a trying to groove a swing type mode?
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes it might be, just sit back and go get a drink of water from the water cooler. I remember with one student, I had him walk from the range up to the clubhouse and back to try to get and it's uphill, to try to get his heart rate going. And we were working on breathing and controlling that for competition. And so doing things like that, I think it's all about solving the puzzle in front of you and trying to figure out that student and what's going to help them make them better. And so by asking questions and observing, I think the better we get to know our students, the better we can help them perform on the golf course and shoot lower scores. So yeah, that's a strategy that I have definitely used.
Yeah, because when you play golf, think about it. You hit a shot and then you're waiting, because you're playing in a foursome, usually, or even if you're in a twosome, you're waiting for the other person to hit. So there's downtime there, and then you're going to your ball. If you're walking, it's taking a little bit longer. If you're riding, it's still taking some time to get to your ball. Then you have to make a decision as to what you're going to do next. So there's a little bit of downtime too, as opposed to pull a ball over, hit it, pull a ball over, hit it, pull a ball over, hit it, pull a ball over, hit it. And nobody plays golf like that. So it's always amazed me that people practice that way, as opposed to practicing more the way that they play. I don't know whether it's because they think I'm going to buy 100 balls, and I got an hour. So I need to hit 100 balls in an hour. So that's why they keep just rapid fire, I always have encouraged my students to get a small bucket, and to every single shot that they take, I have them do some warm-up things, and then to every shot that they take, I have them, as you do, choose different targets, do different things. A lot of times I'll have them pull out an old scorecard and look at the holes and say, okay, I'm going to play this hole. What does this hole do? Let me picture where that shot would be here on the range. It's a dogleg right, so I need to hit it to the corner. And where would the corner be? Well, the corner would be between this post and that post, or that tree and that post. So I need to hit it there. Okay, so where did I hit it? All right, so where would I have been on the hole? All right, so what do I have next? What do I have to hit into the green now? And what type of shot do I need to make? Well, I really blocked myself out here. I need to hit a big cut shot now around the corner to get out into the fairway. Or I'm on the outside corner, and now I have a straight look at the pin, so I can hit a straight shot. So there's things like that now it gets their brain working. They're kind of thinking about, what do I got to do? And then and that takes time. And they can then, when they do that, they can get a small bucket. They don't need to get a large bucket. So now they're also economically, they're not spending as much money on their practice session, unless they're at a club, and they're getting that anyway, and they're not going to a public range, and they're not paying for balls. They already, that's already included in what they're doing, or like you said, if it's supervised practice, they've already paid for their supervised practice. Balls are already there for them. They're not really worried about, I need to hit this many balls because I bought this many balls.
Yeah.
But on the range, like on public ranges, I see that a lot, and I've always encouraged my students that it's quality, not quantity, that really is going to help you improve. And
absolutely,
the less balls you hit, and the more you take your time doing what you would be doing on the golf course, going through your pre-shot routine, doing all those things, instead of just pulling balls over and hitting them, because it's like you didn't even practice when you go to the golf course then, and then you wonder why you're not playing well, and it's because you don't have time. I find those players have poor starts to their round, and by about the 6th hole it starts to come together, and they play well for about 6 holes. Like they'll play 7, 8, and 9 pretty good, and then they'll make the turn. They'll play 10, 11, 12 pretty decently. Then it falls apart again at the end of the round. And that's because they finally have gotten into a groove by the 6th hole with their tempo and their timing and stuff, because that's the way they practice. And then now that they're doing well, then all of a sudden their mind starts to wander, or they put a little bit of pressure on themselves, and now it kind of goes wayward, or they start to get tired too.
I did a seminar for the high school golf coaches in the area a few weeks ago, and I told them, I said, go watch what the basketball coach does. Go watch a basketball practice, because what they will do is, they might spend a little bit of time working on skills, but then they also spend some time working on scrimmaging. And I will encourage my students to go out on the golf course and scrimmage and go out, and it's really practicing on the golf course. Joe Bosco's book, Real Golf, fantastic book for golfers. So if you're listening and you haven't read that book, whether you play the game or teach the game, get Joe Bosco's Real Golf. So one of the strategies in that is playing a personal 3-ball scramble. And I'll give you an example of how I use that. I've got a girl from Scottsbluff, Nebraska that I work with, and we'd worked on her swing and made that better and spent some time on the short game. So now it was time to get out and get on the golf course and start to apply what we had learned out there. So I had her play a 3-ball scramble. And at the time, she's a high school player. And at the time, she was playing the red tees or the forward tees at her club. And she got to the point where she could shoot. She was shooting around 29, 30, 31 in a 3-ball scramble. But one of the things that we talked about was that she figured out that when she had too much tension, she didn't hit the ball as well. So that became one of our goals in the pre-shot routine, and started to add some strategies on reducing tension. And so she learned, just by playing with self-awareness, how she could improve on the golf course. And so then what I call the Mulligan Game, what we did was, all right, so now you're ready for the Mulligan Game, which is go to the first tee and hit a shot, and just continue through your round playing one ball. And then if at any time you feel like you had too much tension, or if simply just didn't like the shot, you get a mulligan. But you're going to keep score, and you're going to keep track of the mulligans. And that first time out, I think she shot 1 over par, and she had 6 or 7 mulligans. Well, we whittled that down to she shot 1 under with 1 mulligan. And so okay, it's time to take away the mulligans.
Yeah.
So then we moved her back to the men's tees, and started getting her ready for college golf by doing the same thing. So it was 3-ball scramble from the white tees, and then we moved to the Mulligan Game eventually, and then she's played a few rounds from the blue tees, from the very back tees at her club. And so she recently signed a national letter of intent to play at a Division I school here in Colorado. And so we used on-course scrimmages as a tool to help her get better at actually playing the game. Another thing that we did was on the golf course was I use shot by shot, which is a great tool for keeping track of your statistics.
Yeah.
And she's really good about posting her shot by shot scores. And so her greens in regulation were somewhere around 9.5 greens. And so we just talked about going out and playing golf with a focus of aiming at the middle of the green, regardless of where the pin is.
Right.
And instantly, her greens in reg went up to about 12. And so we talked about a strategy of, when to aim at the pin and when to not aim at the pin. But the majority of the time, we're just playing to the middle of the green. And this girl's just been a blessing to have as a student. And I think when we first started working, which was about 1.5 years ago, she had told me that she'd only broken 83 times in her life. And heck, now she's going to play Division I level, and she won Nebraska High School State Championship. And, she shoots under par frequently. And so she's done everything that I've asked, but it's really been kind of the whole thing. But the scrimmages on the golf course were, I think, were a big part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that what you said about shooting at the middle of the green, not pin hunting, when you think about it, really, the average green is between 20 to 30 yards deep and wide. So if you can be in the middle, you're pretty much within 2-putt distance of the hole, no matter where it is on the green. And if you can put yourself in 2-putt distance from the green, you're definitely upping your odds of making pars. And you're also upping your odds of hitting a lot more greens because you have a bigger window for margin of error. If the pin is tucked left and you're going for the pin and you pull it a little bit, well, now you're off the green. You missed the green totally. But if you went for the center of the green, even if you pulled it a little bit, you'd pull it towards the pin. So there's things like that I think a lot of players, even that are decent players, a matter of fact, even more so that are decent players, don't think about that. They think about, I got to knock down every pin, and then they miss greens and they're frustrated by that. But I think that's great advice for our listeners that if you just go for the center of the green, just hit greens in regulation, and pars are going to happen. They're just going to happen. Balls are going to start to fall, and you're not going to feel like you're grinding so much out there, and you're going to be a lot more relaxed because you're hitting a lot more greens.
Excuse me, absolutely. With students, my number one focus is to improve their skill level. I say skill trumps technique, and when it comes to skill level, what I'm talking about, Bernard, is face and path, bottom of the swing, which I'll talk about in a moment, and then center contact. So if I can improve the player's skill at controlling the golf club, controlling the bottom point, hit it in the center of the face, yep, they're going to play better golf. And, when we turn on the TV on Saturday and Sunday afternoon, we see a whole variety of swings, but they're all good at controlling those things that I mentioned. And so that's my number one focus, is trying to improve their skill level. Bottom of the arc, I think that's huge. You work for Bobby Clampett, and I know that's one of your big focuses is trying to get the bottom of the arc in the right place.
Yeah, forward swing bottom.
So many of our players don't do that. And, one of my influences is Adam Young's book, The Practice Manual, which I think is fantastic. He talks about the ability of the brain to self-organize. And, an example that he uses in that book is that the last time you used a utensil to feed yourself, whether it was breakfast or dinner last night, that you managed to get food in your mouth, and you've never been technically trained, and you've certainly never done video analysis on that. And Bernard, if I ask you to put your right elbow on the table, I'll bet you could still manage a way to get food in your mouth.
I might have a tough time to do that because I'm left-handed. It might not be so easy.
I think the whole key to that is understanding the brain's ability to self-organize the movement.
Yes.
An example of a bottom of the arc improvement. I had a college player who was a little tendency to get across the line, and his club was coming down behind him a little bit, and he was having a tendency to bottom out early. So we got in a fairway bunker that we have on the range. I drew a line in the sand and had him put it in the middle of his stance. I just wanted to make practice swings and get the divot in the right place.
Right.
And I caught this on video, but by doing that, his position at the top got better and his downswing path got better without him even thinking about it. So if I can take a student and put them in a situation where I can use that ability of the brain to self-organize the motion, if they understand the task, if they understand what I want them to do, sometimes the brain can do that rather than giving them a technique that they have to think about, an internal focus. And an internal focus is something where you're thinking about a body part. That doesn't really go along very often with performance, as would more of an external focus where you're thinking about what you want the club to do or what you want the ball to do. So, the brain's ability to self-organize, I try to take advantage of that as often as I can.
Yeah,
and
I
trying
do
to get
too. I've
bottom
always
of
been
the,
like
in the
that.
same place.
Yeah, I've always been like that. I know that when players, as you mentioned about thinking about getting into a certain position maybe or certain things like that, the brain cannot cognitively think and make a motor skill happen because the motor skill comes from a different part of the brain than what cognitive thinking is.
Absolutely.
So cognitive thinking is prefrontal cortex. Motor skill signals are sent from basal ganglia. So and a perfect example of that is, and I mentioned this to one of my students recently who had a stroke, and the stroke happened in the basal ganglia. So, and they told him he may never walk again. Now that didn't happen. He's playing golf. So essentially, he did what he could to get that motor skills back by doing different things, and feeling what he had to do to get it to happen, rather than consciously thinking about what has to be done, because it's not that easy to do. And a lot of the stuff that I do with my students doesn't involve a ball at all, and we just work on swing bottom. A big one that we do is a line drill, and like you said, in the sand, and we either do it in the sand, or what we do is I actually invented a powder that my students use that we sell, and we call it Impact Zone powder, but it's really my powder. But since I work for Impact Zone, that's what we call it. And you put the powder down in two lines, and you set up behind the back line, which represents, and the line actually represents the center of the ball. And your goal is to start your divot from the beginning of that, from the front of that back line, and make the deepest part at the second line, which is essentially 4 inches ahead. So now they're starting to measure where their swing bottom is, and when they start to think about that without a ball, as you mentioned, the body starts to self-correct and find a way to move that swing bottom forward. And the more that they do that without a ball, the more that pathway is built within basal ganglia to allow the motor skill to start to become and take effect. I'm reading a thing right now, a book that I recommend to everyone that has nothing to do with golf, but it's called Brain Hacking. Change Your Mind in 21 Days. And it takes 21 days to build new neuron pathways and to change a habit. So whenever you're trying a new motor skill or trying to work at a new motor skill, don't expect it to happen within an hour lesson. It's not going to, but you need to be working on it for 21 days, for it to start to take effect. How long do you have to work on it for 21 days? 5-10 minutes a day. We'll do it. Because now it's starting to soak in, and you're doing it consistently, and if you can do it at the same time every day, that will work even better. Because now the brain is ready to absorb that information at that same time every day, and pathways are built much easier. So there's a lot of things like that I think players overlook. I don't think that coaches do. I think that there's a lot and there might be some coaches that overlook those things, but I think the better coaches, they encompass all of those things along with those, what we call dynamics, as you said. Swing bottom, flat lead wrist, loading the club properly, delivering the club properly, using the core to deliver the club, not all arms, not all shoulders, delivering the shaft down the target line. Things of that, as you mentioned earlier, all the great players have all these different swing styles, but they all do those same things. They know how to do them, and they do them well, and they do them consistently. That's really what builds consistency. Not you need to be one plane, you need to be two plane, you need to be this, you need to be here, or you need to be there. As long as it's right at impact, and your swing bottom is happening at the correct point, you're going to start to see results. You're going to improve.
I had a second lesson ever with a high school player this past Saturday, and we worked on having an understanding of why the golf ball does what it does. And so we did something I call Clubface awareness drill, where I explained the influence of the clubface and had him hit one to the left, one to the right, one down the middle. And so we did that for a while, and then I challenged him a little bit. He came to me. First lesson was a couple of weeks ago. He came to me with a very, very strong grip and a very close clubface. And of course, his big miss was a snap hook. So we worked on the grip a little bit. Actually, I just put a tennis racket in his hand, in his trail hand. He's left-handed. And I said, show me how you would hold the tennis racket. And so, he automatically put his hand on how we would want him to. And I said, well, and then I turned his hand under like this. Well, why wouldn't you hold it like that? And he figured out that, the racket would do this. And
right.
So
wouldn't go where I wanted to go. Same
right.
thing.
And of course, we took away an error that would cause the ball to go to the right. So then he was missing some shots to the left. So we spent some time on Saturday morning working on club face awareness and left, right, middle, and then I challenged him. I put him in a very weak position and still challenged him to do the same thing. I want you to hit left, right, middle with a grip that's too weak. And then we put him in a strong grip and had him do the same. And of course, that was pretty easy for him because that was his history.
Right.
But just working on doing that, and then we worked on curving the ball. Okay, I want you to big hook. Okay, now take a little bit off, and I want you to big slice and then take a little bit off. So what we were really doing was I was helping him to understand what makes the ball do what it does, and that way he has a better understanding of his swing. He has a better understanding when his swing goes awry of maybe thinking about what his tendencies are, and then going back, okay, well this must be happening. So
yeah,
I think that's
awareness.
important.
Yeah, brain awareness too. I mean, it says now he's getting aware of what it takes to make the ball do certain things, and now when he has to make the ball do certain things, he knows how to do it. He's figured it out. And so many players don't do that at all. They keep trying to hit, a straight shot and don't even try to do anything with the ball to try to figure out what, experiment. And that's a big part of it too. I mean, all the greatest players in the world experimented, and some of the best had to do it through necessity. Seve used to do it because all he had was a 4-iron. Well, I mean, he had to figure out how to hit every shot with a 4-iron. I mean, he had a chip with a 4-iron. He had a pitch with a 4-iron. He had a putt with a 4-iron. So everything that he did, that's the only club he had. He had to figure out how to make it happen, how to change the loft on that club, how how to hold it off, how to hit fades, how to draw it, how to hit it straight, and that's what made him such an incredible player, because he experimented with all these things and learned through trial and error. So for players who would like to come and see you, or to maybe take a lesson, or if they're in your area, or maybe even just talk to you if they're not in their area, what is the best way for them to get in touch with you, and what is the website for them to use?
My website is edoldhamgolf.com. It's EDOLDHAM golf.com, and it's Ed Old, like Oldham. Phone number at work is area code 303-466-2111. And yeah, love talking golf. I could sit here all day and talk to you about this stuff, Bernard.
Yeah, it was fun. It was really fun. I really enjoyed it. And I feel that this was one of the better episodes that I've had, because we've really touched base on a lot of different things here. And you've dropped a lot of precious nuggets of wisdom on the listeners, which we very, very appreciate you stopping by to do so.
Thanks, Bernard. Thanks for inviting me. I enjoyed this.
Yeah, it was
Let's
great.
do it again.
We'll have to we will. We'll have to have you on again. I do have repeat guests. There have been a few. And but I think that would be a great idea, and then we can talk about other things in the game, and maybe a little bit more of techniques and things like that. But this was wonderful. So what we always like to say in parting is, until we meet again, do your best to keep it in the short grass. Okay?
That's right. Thanks, Bernard.
All right, great. Take care.
You've been listening to Breaking Par with your host, Bernard Sheridan. Follow us on Twitter @BreakingPar and on Facebook @Par Breakers Golf Academy. Until next week, try to keep it on the short grass.